Hey, folks, this is Ben Beerley with Rebuild Illinois, and we're back with another candidate interview. Today, we have with us David Shestokas, who is running for Illinois Attorney General. And he is a good friend of mine. He is a great constitutional lawyer. And so let's go ahead and bring him in. Hey, David,
Hello, Ben.
welcome back to Rebuild Illinois.
Thank you so much. It is great to be back. It's been a while. I remember
Mhm.
when you guys were first starting this, and it was, and I'm so happy to have seen the progress that you've made in terms of educating people about issues involved in rebuilding Illinois, and your efforts to work on making Illinois great again.
Thank you. Thank you. So, hey, why don't we begin, if you will? Can you give us a short education on the office of Attorney General? Because a lot of people don't understand the difference between the state Attorney General and the U.S. Attorney General.
Thank you, Ben. That's exactly correct. People get those things, get those offices mixed up in terms of what their duties are, simply because they carry the same title. The United States Attorney General is appointed by and serves at the pleasure of the President of the United States, and is also head of the Justice Department. And even though the U.S. Attorney General always says that they're going to act impartially when it comes to the conduct of the Justice Department, ultimately knowing that the President can fire the Attorney General more often than not executes the policies of the President. So that's the situation with the United States Attorney General. The Illinois Attorney General is a completely different animal, even though it carries the same title. And it's got to do with the fact that it's a separate constitutional office. It's created by the Illinois Constitution. And then it has something called the Illinois Attorney General Act that provides for statutory duties. And those statutory duties indicate that the first duty of the Illinois Attorney General is, in fact, to represent the people of the state, not the governor, not the government, not the Illinois Department of Public Health, Board of Elections, Board of Education, you name the alphabet soup, but rather supposed to represent the people. And that's huge difference.
What's been going on then recently with the Illinois Attorney General?
Well, in a couple of respects, of course, we've had these last 2 years that have been going on. And in March of 2020, Mr. Pritzker issued his first executive order related to the Illinois Emergency Management Act and how he decided to exercise essentially a one-man rule in the state of Illinois. The problem is that the Illinois Emergency Management Act has always only provided for 30 days for the governor to exercise such extraordinary power, and within which he is supposed to go to the legislature to have the rest of the government, that is, those elected by the people, participate in the management of the disaster. However, in late April, early May, the Illinois Attorney General, Kwame Raoul, issued a new opinion that said, never mind the 30 days. It went down for 15 pages, but ultimately says, no, the governor can issue successive emergency orders and successive disaster declarations. And as a result, he can continue on without ever involving the state legislature. This is a huge problem because the Illinois Attorney General literally just made up the law, and the governor pretended that that was in fact the law, and the legislature abdicated their authority to step in. And so a proper attorney general should have told the governor, Mr. Governor, your 30 days is up. You want anything further, you have to go to the legislature and have them participate. Otherwise, I am not defending what you do in a courtroom. But over the next 2 years, Raoul rewrote the law all by himself, and then proceeded to defend it in a courtroom. And it dragged us out for 2 years with this one-man tyrannical rule. And there's a lot of abdication all along the way, from the state legislature to the governor.
Right. Only one legislator actually challenged the governor in that, in fact. And of course, I'm talking about Senator Darren Bailey, a representative at the time, Darren Bailey. He was the only one, and you're absolutely right. The legislature had standing to challenge the governor in his, one-man kingdom of
And
Illinois.
it's one man kingdom. That's exactly right. But I try to emphasize to people that they should understand that everything they don't like about J.B. Pritzker, Kwame
Hmm.
Raoul made possible. Because Pritzker, it's very interesting too that the Illinois Attorney General again is elected by the people and responsible to the people, and as a result, should in fact represent them. But the governor treated the Attorney General as if it was his partner in his appointment, and Raoul acted like he was the governor's partner and the governor's appointment, and issued things that he called legal opinions that were in fact political documents. And this is really the problem. We have to get back to where the Attorney General, the independently elected Attorney General, represents the people. And there's a lot of ways we can do that. Part and parcel of that is the trip to the slogan of the campaign, that is to make crime illegal again.
Yeah.
There's authorities of the office we're going to talk about now.
And that really gets to the point really of the Attorney General and why it's so important for you, the people, to vote for an Attorney General and not just assume that that's going to be taken care of, because you're the ones that really make a difference with that. And constitutionally speaking, the Attorney General's office is in the executive branch, but it is its own office, separate from the governor. So you want to cover a little bit of the responsibilities then of the Attorney General?
Absolutely. As things went by, I did, in fact, I was also I am continuing to be the attorney for the Illinois Conservative Union in a lawsuit against the Board of Elections. And essentially all we're asking the Board of Elections to do is follow federal law in terms of providing the data to make sure that the Board of Elections is properly doing their job when it comes to keeping voter rolls clean and up to date. And there's something called the National Voter Registration Act, Section 8, that provides for a private right of enforcement regarding the maintenance of voter rolls. And the four ladies that make up the board of the Illinois Conservative Union went about almost 3 years ago now and asked the board for the data. And the board said, no, you can't have it. And ultimately, we wound up having to sue the Board of Elections. And they are now represented by the Illinois Attorney General's office. And all we asked them to do was obey the law. And all the Illinois Attorney General's office is doing is say, no, we don't have to. You've got the Attorney General's office telling citizens that elected him that their government does not have to obey the law. This has to stop, Ben. This is not, and it's not the only place that this is going on. And so we're going to do what we can when I'm elected to, in fact, resolve these cases where the citizens are, in fact, trying to vindicate either statutory or constitutional rights. They should be resolutions. They shouldn't be litigation. And then we're going to resolve those cases. And then we've got a plan that we're going to put in place to make crime illegal again. That would be the next step after we resolve these cases. We're going to explain that in a moment or two, I know.
Yeah, okay. So we've kind of explained a little bit about the Attorney General then. So can you give us your experience in also why did you decide then to run for Attorney General?
Sure. I've been a lawyer 35 years now is how long I've been an attorney. So we've got a broad range of experience in a number of places, but one of which probably colored everything I've done ever since. And that was I was an assistant state's attorney for Cook County. Back in an unusual time, I think some people may remember this, we actually used to prosecute criminals and see to it that justice was done both for the victims and for the people of the state of Illinois. Currently, that's not going on. We'll talk about that in a moment. But I've done more than that in 2020 and 2016 and 2020. I actually did work on the president's campaign and president's legal aspects of the voting aspects of the campaign in Florida, Broward County. If people want to look, if they Google Shestokas and Miami Herald, you'll find a few stories about the 150,000 ballots that I found illegally open there. Then I spent 5 weeks in Pennsylvania. I was in court with Mayor Giuliani, and I ultimately testified before the Pennsylvania Senate as to election matters there. I worked with the NRSC on the runoff elections in Georgia. So we've got significant election experience. During the pandemic, I also did work in terms of filing suit on behalf of a church to see to it that the church that I was representing would not be declared non-essential and shut down during the pandemic. Of course, the Illinois Attorney General has, in fact, went all the way to the United States Supreme Court trying to get these cases, trying to get churches declared non-essential and give the governor authority over churches contrary to the First Amendment.
So
the
essentially our current Attorney General, Kwame Raoul, has spent taxpayer money fighting against the people.
That's in essence exactly correct. He's been spending taxpayer money. Some major portion of the 450 odd assistant attorneys general in the office have been spending their time litigating against the people of the state of Illinois rather than on their behalf. And that's the very first thing we're going to change. Because for a number of reasons, of course, crime is on everybody's mind. As an assistant state's attorney, I prosecuted and was involved in the investigation of more than 400 felony cases. And I was involved with the prosecution of more than 10,000 misdemeanors. And I might mention that the other fellows that are running in this race, the next time they prosecute a criminal case will in fact be their first. And so I think the experience in that regard is really, really important, because we have these situations where somebody like Kim Fox in Cook County or Eric Reinhardt in Lake County are turning people loose that should not be, creating further dangers to the people in the community. And people don't know because the Attorney General does not exercise this authority. They have not done their oversight of the local prosecutors. But there's a clause in the Illinois Attorney General Act indicating that the Attorney General has authority over every case in which the state may be interested. And people should realize, and they probably know, that any criminal case is entitled the people of the state of Illinois versus the defendant. And so the Attorney General has authority over every criminal case in the state. And when the local prosecutors do not move to protect the people with their rights, we will in fact move to do so. And so I think that's really, really important for folks to know. And that I'm the only former prosecutor in the race and the only one in a position to have the experience to know that the assistant attorneys general in the office, that they're doing their job properly when it comes to criminal matters, when it comes to issues with religious liberty, when it comes to issues of elections. It's a broad swath that the Attorney General's office covers, and each and every element of that swath I've got some experience in, and so I think it's really, really important to do that. You know, everybody talks about things, and I guess we'll get into election integrity, but we have to enforce it.
Why specifically did you decide to run this time?
That's kind of an interesting story, because I was in Decatur, Illinois. I mentioned in passing that I worked in Pennsylvania for about 5 weeks on election matters back in 2020, and I actually do a whole presentation about that. I did one for an organization in Decatur called Restore Our Constitution, and afterwards I was speaking with State Representative Dan Calkins, who had been in the audience, and Dan came over and talked to me, and he was explaining how the strategies that they were applying to for the state legislature, because he was working with trying to recruit candidates for downstate. And I said to Dan, I said, well, if it turns out to be appropriate, I said, I'll be happy to put myself forward as a candidate in that situation. And Dan said, Dave, why don't you run for Attorney General? And that's how this came about. It wasn't even my idea in the first place. That was in April of 21. We did continue to do our due diligence and talk to different people and study the office and the job. And in October, I ultimately wound up making a formal announcement at an Illinois Conservative Union event. And so that's how it came to be. It wasn't my idea. It was suggested to me. And the more we studied the office, the more I understood that, as far as I can tell, despite the fact that all the sound and the fury and everybody's interested in the governor's race. As far as I can tell, this may very well be the most important office on the ballot. The interesting thing, Ben, is that when the attorney general and the governor disagree about the law, guess who wins?
It should be the attorney general.
That's exactly correct. You're exactly correct. It is the attorney general. And, the attorney general, again, is elected by the people. And if the governor doesn't like what the attorney general perceives to be the law, he's stuck with the lawyer that the people picked. He can't go out and get a second opinion. He can't go out and get another lawyer to represent the governor outside the attorney general. And so it's a very interesting thing. So the people can, in fact, put a check on the governor, whomever he may be, whether it's Mr. Pritzker or one of the current crop of Republican candidates running against him. The attorney general can, in fact, exercise authority to do what? To see to it that the government follows the law. I've gotten any number of questionnaires from a variety of sources asking about things, and one of which is about the restoration of the rule of law. And my answer, generally speaking, is the very first thing we can do to restore the rule of law is see to it that the government follows the law.
The government is the biggest offender when it comes to the law. If you were to ask me, that's what I would say, because we've seen too many times where they just kind of ignore their own laws that they've written. And, that is a definite problem.
Yeah, not only do they ignore them, they actually pretend that the law is what they say it is. Mm-hmm. This is like the brand new attorney general opinion in April of 2020 that said to Mr. Pritzker, "Oh no, you're not stuck with the 30 days that the law says. You can issue successive disaster declarations. There is no authority. Everything that Pritzker's done since April of 2020, 30 days after his first declaration, has been illegal." And he was illegally abetted by the attorney general, who defended all the illegal acts that the governor was engaged in. And this is a problem. So we're gonna straighten that out right away on the very first day.
Okay, so let me change the subject a little bit here. Have you, by chance, held office previously?
Elected
office, obviously.
Elective office is what you're speaking of, and I for 9 years I was an elected member of the Lamont Library Board of Trustees. I served both as treasurer and president. I was happy that during the course of my tenure, we built a brand new library, the actual first standalone library in Lamont, and the budget was a bit under $3 million, and we brought it in at $150,000 under budget. So we were really, really pleased about that. So that is the singular elective office I held, but I was an assistant state's attorney, and that of course is an appointive office. And for anybody and I was assistant state's attorney in Cook County. And for anybody that's wondering, there was a short period of time when Jack O'Malley was the state's attorney, and Jack was the last countywide Republican officer holder in Cook County. So I was appointed by a Republican to a Cook County office, which was. So I got to clarify that. We got to tell people that's how I got the office, was through a Republican appointment, not a Democrat.
Okay, well, that's good, and even your stint with the library. It's important to note that is a very important position to hold, and it's a really good experience. So let's move on and talk a little bit about Cook County. So as we know, Cook County, for any statewide office, Cook County is kind of the linchpin to winning the state election. So what is your plan to win over some of the Democrat voters there in Chicago and in suburban Cook County? And have you started to implement that plan?
We have on a couple of different levels. I would suggest that, of course, many people have trouble with Shestokas. Shestokas actually is a Lithuanian name. And I will tell you that in Cook County, there are over 1 million Lithuanians and Poles and Romanians and Ukrainians and folks of Eastern European heritage whose families have all had been exposed to the dangers and the tragedies of communism, one of whom that I can number among them is my grandmother, Barbara Shestokas, who was one of 11 children. She was put on a boat by herself from Lithuania to the United States when she was 15 years old. Ultimately, the communists would slaughter 8 of her brothers and sisters who they had a family farm. Two were priests, one was a nun, another was a school teacher. So people that were in business, in religion, and education were all killed by the communists in the takeover in the early days of the 20th century. And Grandma was the first, was among the people in her family to survive that because they sent her to America for safety. And
let me interject a little bit. And, when you talk about campaigns, this is just general education for our listeners, is demographics matter in elections. And the fact that you have this connection then with 1 million people in Cook County is great in your favor, because they're going to recognize, if they don't recognize your name and connect it to your face, they're going to recognize that you have this same heritage, and that is a bit of an advantage for you when it comes to there. As opposed to me, where I got a German name, that's great in Pennsylvania, but not so much here because of who settled here in Illinois.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Ben. So we have that connection. I've been speaking at the Romanian church. I've been speaking at a variety of Lithuanian events. I've been become a member of the Polish American Congress, the Illinois division. So we're doing a lot of things to connect there, but also I've done something that neither of my opponents has done, and that is to name a couple of the people that would be part of the administration should I win. And one of whom is a fellow by the name of Christopher Fenn Cook. And Christopher ran against Kim Foxx in 2016 and garnered over 600 or nearly 600,000 votes against Ray, who was running against Kim Foxx. He's a 31-year veteran of the professional career prosecutor, if you will, done more than 2,000 trials. But Christopher has a significant understanding of what you need to do to get significant votes in Cook County. And so we have two paths, and all we need to do is switch from what Erica Harrell did in 2018. We need 277,000 votes switch. That's it. And between our million friends in the Eastern European community and the connections we have with Christopher, who's going to be my chief criminal prosecutor in the office, we have in fact a path to victory in November, regardless of who may or may not be involved in the governor's race. So we're looking forward to that. And I might mention, of course, that I've had great reception. I've in several settings I've spoken to over 450 Black pastors, and people say, well, what about the Black community, which is so important in Cook County? And I'm going, my understanding is from spending time with the Black pastors, everybody wants the same thing. They all want their families to be safe. They all want the crimes to be prosecuted. They want to be able to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. And so we don't have to tailor a message for anybody, because all we're going to do, everybody's interested in saying make crime illegal again. And I mentioned earlier about how the Attorney General is litigating against the people. We're going to quit doing that, and we're going to have a whole bunch of assistant attorneys general with nothing to do. And we are going to use them to monitor the Kim Foxes and the Eric Reinhardts of the world and see to it that the crimes that should be prosecuted, that put people's life, liberty, and property in danger here in the state of Illinois, in fact, get prosecuted by our office. And so we're going to have professional prosecutors. We're going to have Lieutenant Colonel Terry Lemming of the Illinois State Police, former assistant director of that great agency. We're going to have him be our chief of investigations. So we've got things lined up and how we're going to do this, and we have the assets to do it by not litigating against the people and taking those assistants and seeing to it that we see to it that they prosecute crimes. And so that's that. We have a full plan, and the people of Cook County understand this, and they are the ones that are suffering the most. And right now, they want their people to be safe, and yet there's carjackings happening in Palatine and elsewhere. This is horrible. We can't have this stuff going on.
Well, that brings up the subject of crime. So the next question would be that, like you said, crime is on everybody's mind, and it's had a definite impact. You look at the Magnificent Mile, and half of the Magnificent Mile is now closed between the riots in Chicago, which really started that downturn, and then Lori Lightfoot's reaction to the coronavirus in really locking down on businesses. Half of the Magnificent Mile is closed. So what do you plan to do? And you've sort of spoken to this then, but especially with Cook County and the surrounding areas, what can we do to reverse that and like you say, make crime illegal again?
Well, the first order, as I mentioned, the first order of business is to get the AG's office off the people and working for the people. And then I believe that once, you'd like to think that once Kim Fox and Eric Reinhardt and people of that area know that they're actually being monitored and called into account, that perhaps they will do their jobs better as well to keep us from taking over crimes that they should in fact be prosecuting. But if they don't, we will. And it's we've got our work cut out for us with this. They call it the Safety Act, which is just insanity, but it's House Bill 3653 that fully goes into effect on January 1st regarding issues about no cash bail and other kinds of things that we wind up having to prove to judges, certain kinds of requirements regarding the dangerousness of an individual. And so we have to study 3653 in great detail. I was talking to Sheriff Mendrick of DuPage County the other day, and he indicated that there's a variety of people working on what's necessary to straighten out 3653 and put it back in the hands of the people that are in charge of the criminal justice system rather than in the hands of the criminals. So there's a variety of things that we have to do, one of which is legislatively, but the others are things that we can do just based on current law, based on current authority in the office.
Yeah, you mentioned that bill, and I would be interested to see a study where those who have been accused of a crime go out and commit more crime because they're on the streets before their trial.
Yeah, that's a huge problem. I'll refer to Sheriff Mendrick again. Sheriff Mendrick in that same conversation mentioned that at any given moment, up to 80% of the people who are in the DuPage County Jail are folks that were released from Cook County on cases that historically you would not be released upon. They went out and they committed crimes in DuPage. So it doesn't just affect what's going on in those jurisdictions where we have these prosecutors who refuse to prosecute, but it affects the people in the neighboring counties as well, and puts a strain on their law enforcement as well.
Okay, so next question. Assuming that you don't make it to the general election, which of your opponents would you like to see win the primary and why? If you don't, that's really a very, very difficult question. I haven't thought about that in any particular detail. I would suggest that I've got experience in elections and in protecting religious liberty and in doing things regarding criminal activity that neither of them have in that regard. If one of them were open to my counsel on that, I certainly would consider providing that. But absent that, we're planning on winning, Ben. Yeah.
We're planning on winning.
I think that is a good response. Definitely we want somebody who is going to do the right thing. So, you've kind of hit on this already, talking about liberty over tyranny, and the attorney general's job in that is huge in actually ensuring that the people are well represented and protected against those in power who believe that their decisions are the right ones versus what the law says in protection of the people. So, things like mask mandates and vaccine mandates, they've cut businesses and jobs. Students have also been removed from school over those issues. The FOID, oh my goodness, the FOID process has been used to block people from purchasing and owning firearms. So, what would you do to protect liberty here in Illinois?
Well, in terms of, I got an interesting tale for you about the authority of the Attorney General when it comes to the FOID card. While Lisa Madigan was the Attorney General, there was challenges to the Illinois statutory definition of marriage as between a man and a woman. And Lisa Madigan declined to defend the constitutionality of the Illinois law. We ultimately know how that all turned out. And so the Attorney General's decisions on many of these matters kind of dictate the outcome. And when it comes to an FOID card, my understanding is you do not need a permission slip to exercise a constitutional right. And should there be a challenge to the FOID card and I were the Attorney General, we would decline to defend the FOID card because my belief is, in fact, that the FOID card is unconstitutional. And so by declining to defend the law, we wind up in a circumstance where we actually wind up with an agreed judgment that the law is unconstitutional. It's interesting, but we can actually proceed and get rid, I believe, of the FOID card just by taking the appropriate constitutional position. And that goes across the board. We have to enforce the Constitution as well as enforce anything else. There's in Article 6 of the Constitution, there's something called the Supremacy Clause that indicates that the Constitution, with the exception of the exceptions in the 10th Amendment, overrides the states. And certainly the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, applicable to the states through the 14th Amendment, is one of those things where the state is overridden. So we will do a lot of things to protect liberty simply by enforcing the law as it exists, not as we wish it would exist, or not as the governor wished it exist, but rather as it actually exists. And that's just a huge path to restoring liberty and the rule of law in the state of Illinois.
Okay. So next question is like that. Do you plan to reverse Pritzker's quite dictatorial executive orders? And if so, how?
Well, at the moment, of course, to my knowledge, the last I've seen him, based on that joint committee on rules and based on the one particular decision in Sangamon County, and based upon the fact that the governor did not reissue some of the rules when JCAR declined to extend them, it appears as though he's going to try and move forward in terms of operating with the law. Although I think that movement is with the fact that there's an election coming up this year, and so he doesn't want people perturbed with them. But let's just say that it was we went to that same situation where there was a disaster declaration, and the governor assumed these powers that are available under the Illinois Emergency Management Act based upon the 30-day rule. And the governor would issue an executive order or further declaration to extend that 30-day declaration. When somebody would sue under that as being outside the governor's authority, we again would not defend that in court because we would agree that the governor's authority was over in 30 days. And so it's amazing that the Attorney General can, in fact, enforce the law by simply choosing not to defend what it is that the Illinois state government does. If we believe that the Illinois state government, whether it's the governor or some government agency, is acting illegally, unconstitutionally, we will defend the people in that regard, not the government. So I think that's just huge. We'll restore that office to what it was designed to do in the Illinois Constitution and under the Illinois Attorney General Act. And it can have just so much impact. It's interesting. Everybody talks about crime and they talk about this and that, what they want to do in the legislature or in the governor's office. Each and every one of those things that everybody talks about needs about 200 other people to go along with them to make it happen. They have to have the agreement of other members of the legislature, and then they have to have the governor sign it and put it into law. The Attorney General, all the Attorney General has to do on the very first day is enforce the laws that are in place.
Right.
And that's all we have to do, on all the authority that's necessary to do things in terms of monitoring elections, in terms of crime, in terms of religious liberty, in terms of FOID cards. All that authority exists without any changes in any law, and you don't need 200 people to agree with it. All you got to do is enforce the laws that exist. And so I think that's you and I touched on that in terms of the government being lawless. When people talk about the lawlessness of society, it starts with the government. If the government considers itself and conducts itself as though it's bound by the law, that will be the best possible example for the people to, again, conduct themselves and be bound by the law.
Okay. Another question that's kind of on the same subject here is Paul Schimpf, who's running for governor. He's calling for a parental rights bill to be added to the Illinois Constitution. Would you support such an amendment if you were elected?
In the first instance, I will tell you that, of course, the office is an enforcement office. We're not going to, somebody else is going to make policy. But in terms of my own personal belief, I do believe that such a thing is necessary to enshrine permanently the protection of parental rights. However, I have this personal opinion that there's a long line of Supreme Court cases dating back to some Amish folks that wanted to teach their children in. You mentioned Pennsylvania and the Germans and folks that speak German in Pennsylvania. This case was out of Pennsylvania, and the United States Supreme Court says, of course, the parents can teach their kids in German if they want to, and of course, the parents have authority over their children to do that. And so, I suspect that there's a long line of Supreme Court cases that, in fact, already protect these rights properly. And should there be an appropriate challenge, we would side with the parents based on that long line of Supreme Court cases. That I have constitutional problems with this lack of parental notification for minors getting abortions where nobody has to tell their children, nobody has to tell their parents. These are problematic. And I believe that parents do, in fact, have rights. I believe these rights are already in existence, and all we have to do is properly enforce them. And so that would be the first step. But should we want to further enshrine it in the Constitution, I certainly would agree with Mr. Schimpf in that regard.
I love that answer. Because we do, in fact, it's, a lot of things that are not said in the Constitution are because they didn't need to be said at the time that the Constitution was written. So things that we see now where schools are trying to cut out parents. Wow. I mean, it's amazingly dangerous to move in that direction, especially to remove the authority of the parents and when it comes to raising their own children. So,
yeah, this is why there's a movement for in certain areas to essentially erase our history, because in erasing our history, that gives people a blank slate that says different things didn't exist. But there's a long line of cases indicating that parental rights are already in existence. You mentioned something interesting about people understood things. Of course, in 1791, when the Second Amendment was passed, they understood clearly what the right to keep and bear arms meant. There were no cases about the Second Amendment before the United States Supreme Court, before United States versus Miller in the 1930s. It went like 140 years where there were no cases because and what does that tell you? That tells you that everybody actually understood what that meant. And so that's why there was no litigation.
It's very clear. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was when people began to attack the meeting that we started having all these litigation on these kinds of things and on parental rights. You know, that there's always been a default position in favor of parental rights when it comes to their children, and parents, generally speaking, had to affirmatively lose their rights in some way, shape, or form. I spent time in juvenile justice, child protection, while I was a state's attorney. And we would, in fact, terminate parental rights when people abused their children, people neglected their children, when children were born with drugs in their systems. You know, there's ways that parents affirmatively can lose those rights, but the default
Sure.
position is they belong with the parents in the first place.
Okay. Um, I know, just speaking for our listeners, I mean, that is an excellent answer, because you're absolutely right that there are plenty of Supreme Court cases. We're talking about the United States Supreme Court that do uphold those parental rights. And yeah, I'm familiar. I can't think of the name of the one where, especially the Amish and Mennonite communities had to go to the Supreme Court to be able to educate their children outside of the public education system. Um, so let's switch gears a little bit here. Now, I know that you've made it clear that it is the responsibility of uh, the Attorney General to enforce the law, and you don't necessarily make policy. But how can you, as an Attorney General, encourage people and businesses to stay here in Illinois? And as a little background here, we've been losing people for, I think, close to 20 years now. Illinois is actually seeing an exodus, and it's only been increasing lately. So this is a big concern if we're going to remain, I guess, viable as a state government. How can the Attorney General help with that?
Yeah, there's tremendous implications in the loss of population. Apparently, what was kind of a trickle loss just turned into a tsunami in the last year. Apparently, the most recent estimate from 2020 to 2021 is we lost 144,000 people here. And that, of course, just cascades upon itself. Certainly, among the problems turns out to be that people don't feel safe. You know, that you mentioned the shuttered businesses on the Magnificent Mile. It's a shame to drive around and see all the empty stores in the strip malls and the smaller shopping areas that don't include the Magnificent Mile. Why did they shut down? Well, let's see. The Illinois law on shoplifting, or what they call in the statute retail theft, makes it a felony for somebody to steal $300 or more from a shop. Kim Foxx has indicated and currently uses her, quote, discretionary authority to not prosecute any case where the value of the merchandise is less than $1,000. In which case, if they are not prosecuting anybody under $1,000, folks come in with a big bag and shop and clean off the shelves and walk out of the store with impunity. Apparently, they have little calculators that say, "Well, we're at $990. We better leave now." And
So not even a misdemeanor, just nothing.
Nothing. Yeah, literally nothing. There's literally no enforcement. And what does that do to a business? That makes the business have to do one of two things: either get their own enhanced security, which adds to the expense and obviously raises the prices, or they have to shut down because they can't get any insurance for their wares in the store. Nobody will insure them because there's no law enforcement of what would happen. And so this has got a huge contribution. The policies of the prosecutors that do not prosecute has a huge contribution to people not wanting to open a business. And as we all know, the small businesses are really the drivers. They're the major creators of jobs. They're the major creators of wealth and income for the people. And it's the small businesses that suffer the greatest under these circumstances. Your Walmarts and your Costco's and your Best Buys, they can actually afford the security necessary to for the protection of their property and the return on the investment for their shareholders. But if you got if you got a guy that's running a small record store, or if you got a woman that's in charge of an Ulta franchise, and people start stealing thousands of dollars of stuff that their insurance will not cover, they can't stay in business. And when they can't stay in business, they'll go to the jobs. And so those are just the service jobs. Those are just the service jobs. But manufacturing jobs, but they all cascade upon one another. And I would suggest that the very first thing that we can do is create an atmosphere of security and safety, that we are not going to ignore criminal activity, that when people are in fact guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, that we will do what's necessary to see to it that there's justice and that the people of the state are properly protected from those of us who choose to violate the social compact, that choose to not only violate the laws, but violate what's necessary for us to have a civil society. I believe if people see that is going to that will take place under our administration, I believe that has a positive impact on the alleged exodus. So there's any number of places we can have a positive impact. It's not just there. It also has to do with what I talked about regarding not having the government litigate against the people. So there's a lot of things we can do to improve the atmosphere through this office without any further authority from the legislature.
Well, I would add to that, even bigger businesses have decided to pull out of Cook County. The Target stores that were damaged during the riots, the Target Corporation decided not to reopen those stores. And, you're talking, I don't know how many jobs were lost because of that. And then also the availability of products in those areas as a result. So, it's of extreme importance that we have somebody in who is actually going to uphold the law and make it predictable that people are going to be able to operate a business in those areas. So, last major subject area here is election integrity. And so if elected, how do you intend to uncover and fix voter fraud in the Illinois elections?
Well, of course, I have, as I believe I mentioned, I have fairly significant experience in that regard, both working on these matters across the country in Pennsylvania and Georgia and Florida. I did some consulting for the folks in Arizona, and more recently, I've been part of the election integrity committee that was put together by the chairman of the state party. And so I have an idea of where to look in that regard, and we will have our investigators in place to do that. And I might mention that there's actually specific authority for the Attorney General within the Attorney General Act to address election crimes. And I suggest that it's not going to be terribly difficult to discover some places where people were going around the edges of what the law is. And so you have to obviously prove something beyond a reasonable doubt. But we will do that. And I would also suggest that among the things that is the problem is, of course, while there's specific authority within the office of the Attorney General, I can not, within my memory, come up with any election prosecutions that took place through the office. Some years ago, there were some multiple prosecutions downstate, but they were all done by the federal government, much like the situation with, former Speaker Madigan, who was apparently doing some unusual and irregular things in the state of Illinois for about 40 or 50 years, and yet it took the feds to do something about it. Somebody has asked me about the speaker, and a lot of people give speeches saying it's terrific, things will be better now that he's out of there. But the fact is it's kind of embarrassing that went on for 40 or 50 years, and no prosecutor from Illinois did any work to clean these things up. And that's
the same system is in place that made all that possible. And what a lot of those who say, there was no massive election fraud, they they base that on the fact that judges refused to actually prosecute, not that there wasn't any evidence. And I think
Yeah,
you
I've
have
personal
more
experience in
experience
that
there.
regard.
What's that?
I have personal experience in what you're talking about right now, because I
Hmm.
was scheduled to testify in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, on a Tuesday regarding a variety of matters and irregularities that took place in Allegheny County around the election in 2020, in November 2020. And the judge, on his own, canceled the hearing that I was supposed to testify at. And then the day after that testimony was supposed to have given, the judge dismissed the case again on his own. So I have personal experience with being ready to testify as to evidence regarding what happened in Pennsylvania in 2020, and the judge just dismissed the case out of hand without ever hearing any evidence. There was any number of my other colleagues that have similar stories from different courts around the country. So these judges abdicated their authority in that regard. And not only did they abdicate their authority, so did our state legislatures in these other places, because the Constitution gives the state legislature what they call plenary authority to oversee and decide the selection criteria for electors to the Electoral College. And there were so many places where the legislatures could have been involved and they weren't. And so I have personal experience in that regard. And so we know where to look, Ben.
This brings up a good point, and for those who watch this, understand this is why you also need to vote all the way down the ballot and get those judges that will actually act within the law, because we can get David into office, but if he doesn't have the judges necessary to actually hear the cases, then he's going to have an uphill battle in that office. So we need to get the right judges in. Please make sure that you do your homework with regard to those judges. Write them on a list of those who you want to vote for and take that in with you, so you can select the right person when it comes time for the election. So
that's a good point of advice. Hardly anybody does much research on the judiciary. I'm lucky when I go to vote for judges. I know many of them because of my line of work. Most people do not, and so they should consult folks that do, and do their own due diligence on the judicial elections.
Great. Okay, so do you have any closing thoughts that you would like to share with us before we end this interview?
Absolutely. Once again, I thank Rebuild Illinois. I thank you, Ben, for everything you do, Christian, for all his work in this regard, and all the other folks that work with you in this effort. I would say, and not just and it's become because I've done the research on this and understanding of the legal authority of the Office of the Attorney General, that even though all the sound and the fury and everybody runs around worrying about who's going to be the governor, I would suggest that this might very well be the most important office on the ballot. If I'm elected, we will see a sea change, because I will in fact enforce the law. If I'm not elected, strangely enough, you may not see any difference whatsoever. And so this is important. It's a very, very important office. I hope people will visit Dave4ag.com. Dave, that's the number 4ag.com, and find out more about this there. And if they find it in their hearts to enable me to carry this message further about the Office of the Attorney General and educating people on what it actually does and what it can do, please feel free to leave a contribution and join our cause in terms of restoring the rule of law to the state of Illinois. And we will do that. It's something that I've lived with for many, many years, written books about the Constitution, Declaration of Independence. I'm committed to constitutional principles, and we will in fact execute that office according to constitutional principles. Again, it's Dave Shestokas, and we're at Dave4ag.com. And thank you so much, Ben, for having me.
Well, thank you so much for giving us your time today. I know you're very busy. You got to cross the whole state with this message, and it's a very good one. And I'm personally going to be rooting for you in the upcoming primary, and of course, then in the general election as well. And so, folks, thank you for your time, and have a wonderful day as we try to rebuild Illinois.